lived in Japan, basically. I lived in America working and this and that. We'd meet up, always great friends, traveled sometimes together.
For decades, Shirley MacLaine has danced through Hollywood on her own terms. Bold, spiritual, and entirely unapologetic. She's been called everything from eccentric to enlightened, yet one thing about her still sparks curiosity. After her long, unconventional marriage ended, she never walked down the aisle again. Was it heartbreak, freedom, or something far deeper that the world never quite understood? Stick around to find out what really made one of Hollywood's most fearless women swear off marriage for good. Shirley MacLaine, the Hollywood rebel who refused to play by the rules. Before Hollywood ever knew her as the woman who defied its rules, Shirley MacLaine was just a tall, fiery little girl from Virginia with weak ankles and unstoppable drive. Born on April 24, 1934, in Richmond, she entered the world with a name that already carried a hint of destiny, named after child star Shirley Temple, who was stealing hearts on screens at the time. Her father, Ira Owens Beatty, juggled roles as a psychology professor, a public school administrator, and a real estate agent. Her mother, Kathleen Corinne MacLaine, was a drama teacher from Nova Scotia, a woman whose love for the stage quietly lit a spark in her daughter. The Beatty home was filled with discipline, curiosity, and a certain creative restlessness that both Shirley and her younger brother, Warren Beatty, absorbed like oxygen. From an early age, Shirley wasn't one to fit neatly into anyone's box. Her childhood was marked by constant moves, Richmond to Norfolk, then Arlington, then Waverly, and finally back to Arlington again. But instead of feeling uprooted, she learned to adapt, to make every new place her stage. By the time the family settled, her father was working at Thomas Jefferson Junior High School, and Shirley had already carved out her own legend, the only girl on a boys' baseball team swinging home runs like she had something to prove. The boys called her Powerhouse, a nickname that unknowingly would stick to her spirit for life. But before she became a Hollywood powerhouse, her first stage was a ballet studio. At just 3 years old, her mother enrolled her in ballet to strengthen her wobbly ankles. What started as therapy quickly became obsession. Shirley threw herself into every ply and pirouette with a kind of fierce determination most kids her age didn't even understand. She wasn't the delicate ballerina type. She was tall, strong, and often cast in the boys' parts in productions like Romeo and Juliet and The Sleeping Beauty. When she finally landed the fairy godmother role in Cinderella, fate tested her again. She broke her ankle backstage. But instead of quitting, she tied her ribbons tighter, went out there and danced through the pain until the curtain closed. Only then did she call an ambulance. That moment defined her. She wasn't built to back down, even when her body screamed otherwise. Yet ballet, as much as she loved it, had limits. She realized she'd grown too tall and too unorthodox for the perfectionist world of classical dance. Her feet didn't have the elegant arches that ballet demanded, but her willpower, that raw burning energy, was undeniable. So she shifted gears. If the world of dance couldn't contain her, she'd find another one that could. Acting, singing, performing, anything that let her move, express, and take up space on her own terms. By the time she reached Washington Lee High School in Arlington, she'd already figured out how to command attention. She joined the cheerleading squad, took the stage in school plays, and started to discover what would become her lifelong truth, that she was never meant to blend in. Shirley MacLaine wasn't just preparing for a career, she was quietly writing the first chapter of a story that would one day make her one of Hollywood's most unpredictable, unforgettable women. How Shirley MacLaine took over Hollywood, one bold role at a time. By the time Shirley MacLaine was 17, she already had the kind of drive that didn't wait for permission. While most teenagers were daydreaming about prom, she was packing her bags for New York City, chasing a stage career that no one back home in Arlington, Virginia, thought was possible. The summer before her senior year, she landed a spot in the chorus of Oklahoma, not the Broadway version, but the gritty subway circuit that toured underground theaters across the city. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real work, and for Shirley, it was proof that she could survive in the city that made or broke dreamers. After high school, she returned to New York determined to make something of herself. Within months, she made her Broadway debut in the ensemble of Me and Juliet, dancing her heart out night after night. Then came the pajama game. She wasn't the star, not yet, but fate was about to change that. When lead actress Carol Haney broke her ankle during a matinee in May 1954, Shirley stepped in as her understudy. It was the kind of once-in-a-lifetime moment that either buries you or makes you unforgettable. Shirley didn't just perform, she exploded on stage. Her confidence, her energy, and her raw presence caught the eye of comedian Jerry Lewis, who happened to be in the audience that day. He was so impressed he dragged producer Hal B. Wallace to the evening performance, insisting he see her for himself. That night, her Broadway dreams turned cinematic. Wallace signed her on the spot for Paramount Pictures, and just like that, the small-town girl from Virginia was about to become a Hollywood name. Her film debut came in Alfred Hitchcock's The Trouble with Harry, a dark comedy that introduced audiences to a new kind of leading lady, sharp, witty, and impossible to predict. The role earned her a Golden Globe for New Star of the Year, and the industry took notice. That same year, she appeared alongside Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis in Artists and Models, then snagged the female lead in Around the World in 80 Days, which went on to win the Academy Award for Best Picture. In the span of 2 years, Shirley had gone from understudy to international recognition. By 1958, she was everywhere. Hot Spell, The Sheep Man, The Matchmaker, but it was Some Came Running that cemented her as a serious actress. Playing Ginny Moorhead opposite Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin, Shirley embodied vulnerability and heartbreak in a way that stunned critics. She earned her first Oscar nomination for Best Actress, a Golden Globe nod, and a reputation for being fearless in every role. She wasn't playing Hollywood's idea of a leading lady, she was rewriting it. The Rat Pack soon welcomed her into their circle, a rare honor for any woman at the time. She co-starred with Sinatra again in Can Can, and even made a cameo in Ocean's 11, cementing her place in the boys' club of cool. But while the Rat Pack drank and joked, Shirley was quietly building something lasting. That same year, she took on the role that would define her early career, Fran Kubelik in Billy Wilder's The Apartment. The film paired her with Jack Lemmon in a story that was funny, tragic, and brutally human. She played a woman caught in an affair with her boss while being adored by the kind man she overlooked. Critics called her performance real, raw, and heartbreaking. The film swept the Oscars, winning Best Picture and Best Director, while Shirley's performance earned her another Oscar nomination. Though Elizabeth Taylor walked away with the award that year, Shirley's portrayal lingered. Decades later, even Charlize Theron would call it so raw it turned black and white into color. But Shirley's fire wasn't limited to the screen. Off camera, she was as unfiltered as she was unbreakable. In her 1970 memoir, Don't Fall Off the Mountain, she revealed a side of herself Hollywood rarely saw: the fighter. She even wrote about the time she marched into the Hollywood Reporter's office in 1963 and punched columnist Mike Connolly square in the mouth after he printed something she didn't like about her contract battle with Hal Wallace. The story made front-page news, complete with the headline, "Shirley delivers a punchy line." She wasn't ashamed. In fact, she owned it. That was Shirley. Confrontational when needed, always in control of her own story. Her dispute with Wallace wasn't just personal, it was a turning point for actors fighting studio control. She sued him and won, setting a precedent for future stars to have more say over their contracts. Hollywood wasn't used to women standing their ground, but Shirley never cared for how things are done. As the 1960s rolled on, her career kept evolving. She starred in John Goldfarb, Please Come Home, a Cold War comedy written by The Exorcist's William Peter Blatty, and in the stylish heist thriller Gambit, 1966, with Michael Caine. Studios were throwing money at her. 20th Century Fox even offered her $750,000 for a musical adaptation of Bloomer Girl, one of the biggest paychecks for any actress at the time. When the project got canceled, she didn't take it quietly. She sued again, proving that while other stars bowed to the system, Shirley rewrote the rules. By the end of the decade, Shirley MacLaine wasn't just another name on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. She was a force, a woman who broke her ankle and still danced, who stepped in at the last minute and became a star, who punched a columnist, sued a studio, and still showed up smiling on set. Every move she made screamed independence. She didn't wait to be chosen. She chose herself. And in a business built on control, that made her not just a star, but a revolution. The Many Loves of Shirley MacLaine, a life lived on her terms. Shirley MacLaine has never been one to follow anyone's script, not in her career, not in her beliefs, and certainly not in love. The Oscar-winning legend has lived a life that defied convention from the moment she set foot in Hollywood. But if there's one chapter that truly captures the essence of her independence, it's her love life. A journey filled with bold choices, deep honesty, and a refusal to ever settle for less than emotional freedom. She only walked down the aisle once, and that was with producer Steve Parker, the man who would become her husband, friend, and in many ways her lifelong companion in rebellion against tradition. Their marriage lasted nearly 3 decades. But it was never the storybook kind Hollywood liked to sell. It was a union built on understanding rather than conformity. A marriage that allowed both to live fully without pretending to be something they weren't. Shirley was just 19 when she married Parker, a businessman 12 years older who offered her a sense of stability at a time when she was stepping into the unpredictable world of show business. "He was my mate, my counselor, my friend," she reflected years later. "When I came to California from the East Coast, he was there, so I didn't go into Hollywood single." Unlike the starlets of her era who played the part of unattached glamour girls to appeal to male audiences, Shirley entered Hollywood already spoken for, and she liked it that way. But Shirley was never meant to live a conventional life. As her fame rose through the 1950s and beyond, so did her understanding of herself, her needs, her boundaries, and her truth. She told Vanity Fair that she'd made a pact with herself early on to be her own woman. "From the beginning, I was going to be my girl," she explained. "That's been my guide. Not that I appealed to everybody, I think I appealed to myself." That philosophy shaped not just her career, but her marriage too. Shirley and Steve agreed to an open relationship, a radical concept at the time. While the rest of Hollywood whispered behind closed doors, she was boldly transparent about it. She had affairs with some of the most fascinating men of her time, including co-stars like Robert Mitchum, Danny Kaye, and Yves Montand, as well as political figures such as Sweden's Olof Palme, Australia's Andrew Peacock, and even Canada's Pierre Trudeau. For Shirley, love and attraction were natural, fluid, and never something to be confined by social norms. She once admitted that most of her relationships lasted about 3 years, long enough to be meaningful, short enough to stay honest. "Maybe it took me 3 years to be bored," she joked. But through it all, Parker remained a constant in her life. Their arrangement may have puzzled outsiders, but for them it worked. "No one understood it, but we did," she told people. "He lived in Japan, basically. I lived in America working, and we'd meet up, always great friends, and traveled sometimes together." To many, it seemed like an odd setup, but to Shirley, it was liberation. Their marriage was rooted in trust, respect, and a shared understanding that love didn't have to mean ownership. "We stayed married so we wouldn't be tempted to marry again," she once said with her trademark humor. It was both a confession and a quiet rebellion against the traditional idea that marriage was supposed to complete you. Together, they had a daughter, Sachi Parker, who was raised primarily by her father in Japan. Though their family life was far from ordinary, Shirley never pretended it was. Her truth was her power, and she wore it without apology. When the marriage finally ended in 1982, there was no bitterness, only closure. Even after Parker's death in 2001, she referred to him as the love of her life, not because their love was perfect, but because it was real. Looking back, Shirley doesn't romanticize marriage. She calls it what it is: complicated, often unnecessary, and rarely built to last. "I think that's the basis for a long-lasting marriage, if you want to do such a thing," she reflected. "Better to stay friends." I was very open about all of that, and so was he. It's that fearless honesty that has kept her heart intact all these years. She's lived, loved, and learned, but she's never been broken. And maybe that's what makes Shirley MacLaine such a rare breed in Hollywood, not just her talent, but her refusal to play by the unspoken rules. She didn't just survive the industry, she carved her own lane and made it sparkle. Yet as much as her career shimmered, it was her beliefs, her unfiltered curiosity about the universe, that truly set her apart. From Hollywood feuds to shocking beliefs, Shirley MacLaine's most controversial moments. For decades, Shirley MacLaine has been Hollywood's spiritual wildcard, fearless, outspoken, and unapologetically offbeat. While most stars played it safe, she built a reputation for diving headfirst into subjects others wouldn't even whisper about: reincarnation, UFOs, past lives, and cosmic energy. But one of her boldest statements would push even her devoted fans to the edge of disbelief. It started with her book, What If?, a collection of musings where MacLaine let her imagination run wild, asking daring, often uncomfortable questions about life, death, and the unseen. But tucked between her light-hearted hypotheticals, like wondering what would happen if frogs had wings or if the cast of Downton Abbey were American, was a passage that sparked outrage across the globe. In the newly updated version of the book, MacLaine questioned whether the victims of the Holocaust might have been paying karmic debts from previous lives, possibly as Roman soldiers who killed Christians or as crusaders who murdered in Christ's name. Her words, "The energy of killing is endless and will be experienced by the killer and the killee," ignited an immediate firestorm. Critics and faith leaders called the remarks deeply offensive. Rabbi Abraham Cooper of the Simon Wiesenthal Center said her understanding of karma was dangerously misguided, adding that nothing, not reincarnation, not energy, not any cosmic balance could ever justify the Holocaust. To many, her speculation felt less like spiritual curiosity and more like a wound reopened. But this wasn't the first time Shirley MacLaine's beliefs had turned heads. She'd once claimed to have lived in Atlantis in a past life and suggested that her longtime friend, the late Stephen Hawking, might have chosen his ALS to free his mind for scientific brilliance. For her, life and death were part of a grand mystical loop where souls learned through pain and transcendence. For others, her theories were too bizarre to stomach. When pressed about why she gravitates towards such controversial topics, MacLaine told Oprah Winfrey that she's driven by curiosity, the need to understand what lies beneath the things we'd rather ignore. The things that happen that we don't really want to grapple with, she said. It's an inspiration to try to figure out what's going on here. To her critics, she crossed a moral line. To her followers, she simply spoke the uncomfortable truths others were too afraid to question. Either way, Shirley MacLaine has never backed down from controversy, not in Hollywood, not in spirituality, and certainly not in this lifetime. That fearless streak didn't just show up in her spiritual musings, it followed her right onto the film set. Because for Shirley, confrontation wasn't something to run from, it was something to lean into. And nowhere was that more evident than during one of the most talked-about on-set rivalries in movie history: the Shirley MacLaine and Debra Winger feud. When Shirley MacLaine and Debra Winger were cast as mother and daughter in terms of endearment, Hollywood expected magic, and it got that, just not the kind anyone anticipated. On screen, their chemistry was electric, volatile, and heartbreakingly real. Off-screen, that tension didn't disappear when the camera stopped rolling, it only deepened. What started as artistic friction soon became one of the most infamous feuds in Hollywood history. In the 1983 classic, MacLaine played Aurora Greenway, a sharp-tongued, controlling mother who disapproved of nearly everything her daughter Emma did. Winger, playing that daughter, brought raw emotion and fiery unpredictability to every scene. Together, they turned terms of endearment into a masterpiece. But behind that brilliance was chaos. From the moment they met, sparks flew, and not the good kind. MacLaine later reflected that their differences were obvious from day one. While she walked onto set wrapped in her glamorous leftover fur coats, Winger showed up in combat boots and a mini-skirt. The contrast, MacLaine recalled, was so extreme it almost felt symbolic. The old Hollywood icon versus the new restless rebel. Rumors soon swirled around the term set, whispers about shouting matches, power plays, and even one of them slugging the other. Their acting styles didn't help matters. Winger thrived on intensity, improvisation, and chaos, the kind that blurred the line between performance and provocation. MacLaine preferred precision, control, and emotional discipline. They were both brilliant in their own way, but together, it was a recipe for combustion. Even so, both later admitted that their friction might have made the film stronger. Winger described their dynamic as a constant sparring match, part challenge, part performance, while MacLaine admitted the process was gritty and unpredictable and had the Paramount executives convinced they were out of their minds. When award season rolled around, the tension followed them to the Oscars. Both women were nominated for Best Actress. When MacLaine won, she stood on that stage and called working with Winger an experience of turbulent brilliance, saying she had felt like she'd had two daughters during filming. Cameras panned to Winger, laughing in her seat, though whether out of pride or disbelief, no one could quite tell. Years later, more stories from the set began to surface, and the feud took on a life of its own. In her memoir, My Lucky Stars, MacLaine described a rehearsal incident where Winger tried to direct her, telling her where to stand. MacLaine recalled replying that she knew her marks perfectly well, to which Winger allegedly turned, lifted her skirt, and farted in her face before walking away. The story became Hollywood legend, both shocking and strangely believable given their combustible history. Decades later, when Winger appeared on Watch What Happens Live with Andy Cohen, she was finally asked to respond to all those wild tales. Cohen brought up the infamous rumors, the farting and the licking of MacLaine's leg during a Jack Nicholson scene, and asked if any of it was true. Winger brushed it off with her signature mischief, insisting she never wrote about MacLaine and implying the older star was the one fueling the myth. When pressed further, she teased that there was something true in there, leaving everyone wondering which part she meant. Through it all, both women have insisted that beneath the tension, there was always a layer of respect. Winger once reflected that they fought, yes, but that their battles came from a shared commitment to the work, that when they weren't challenging themselves, they challenged each other. Still, the scars of that creative war never fully faded. Their performances in terms of endearment remain among the finest of their careers, fueled by a rivalry so fierce it blurred the line between acting and reality. The result? A film that won 5 Oscars, including one for MacLaine, and a feud that Hollywood still hasn't stopped talking about. But terms of endearment wasn't the only time Shirley found herself caught in a creative storm. If her tension with Debra Winger was like lightning, bright, explosive, and unforgettable, her next on-set feud was more like a wildfire, slow to ignite, but impossible to contain once it did. The feud with Anthony Hopkins. When Shirley MacLaine and Anthony Hopkins were cast together in A Change of Seasons back in 1980, it sounded like a powerhouse pairing. 2 Oscar-caliber actors, one biting marital drama, and the kind of tension that could light up the screen. But behind the camera, that fire turned toxic fast. What was meant to be a witty romantic dramedy ended up as a full-blown clash of egos and one of Hollywood's most openly admitted feuds. The film itself didn't stand a chance. It flopped both critically and commercially, earning 3 nominations at the first-ever Razzie Awards for honoring the year's worst performances and scripts. Hopkins was up for Worst Actor, and the film's reputation only went downhill from there. But the real drama was never on screen. It was happening between its stars. Hopkins once described Shirley MacLaine as the most obnoxious actress he had ever worked with. No soft edges, no attempt to sugarcoat, just pure disdain. The remark became infamous in Hollywood circles, though Hopkins never expanded on what exactly drove him mad about her. Perhaps it was her sharp tongue, her spiritual confidence, or her refusal to play the Hollywood game by anyone's rules but her own. Whatever it was, their chemistry on set clearly didn't translate into friendship once the cameras stopped rolling. When MacLaine was asked years later about Hopkins's brutal comment, she didn't play the victim. Instead, she fired back with the same disarming honesty that's defined her entire career. She made it clear the dislike went both ways, adding that Hopkins was sober at the time and that the adjustment had made things difficult for him. It wasn't a cheap jab. It was MacLaine's way of calling it exactly how she saw it. Hopkins's sobriety was no secret. He had given up drinking 5 years before A Change of Seasons, finding his way through the chaos of addiction. He once explained that asking for help had dissolved his fears and made him realize he wasn't alone in his struggle. That honesty about his demons later became part of his brilliance, But at that point in his life, the storm was still close beneath the surface. The tension between him and MacLaine likely came down to personality, a combustible mix of temper and truth-telling. Hopkins has often described himself as a man who wrestled with volcanic anger, calling it both a curse and a strange kind of gift. Over time, he learned to channel it, to let it drive his work instead of his rage. But back in 1980, that control wasn't yet perfected. And standing opposite him was Shirley MacLaine, a woman known for her outspokenness, her defiance, and her utter refusal to dim her light for anyone. MacLaine has never pretended to be easy. She's admitted that her bluntness often gets mistaken for diva behavior, but insists her truth-telling comes from authenticity, not arrogance. She's been in Hollywood long enough to spot pretense from a mile away, and she never hesitated to call it out, even if it meant locking horns with a legend. So, when A Change of Seasons crumbled under poor reviews, both stars walked away with more than just a failed film. They carried the scars of a creative collision. For MacLaine, it was another reminder that speaking her truth came at a price. For Hopkins, it was perhaps one more battle in his long war with his own temperament. Their feud wasn't just about bad chemistry. It was about two forces of nature meeting in the wrong moment, one still mastering his demons, the other unwilling to bend hers. And when those kinds of stars collide, it's no wonder the screen couldn't contain the fallout. Shirley MacLaine confesses why she never married again. Shirley MacLaine's life reads like a screenplay that refuses to follow the usual script. Born in 1934, she became one of Hollywood's most fearless women, the kind who could steal a scene without saying a word. From The Apartment to Terms of Endearment, her career wasn't just successful, it was unstoppable. She's won an Oscar, multiple Golden Globes, and the kind of respect few actresses ever achieve. But behind that glittering resume was a woman quietly redefining what love and commitment meant. Her only marriage to film producer Steve Parker lasted nearly 3 decades, from 1954 to 1982. But it wasn't your typical Hollywood romance. By her own admission, it was an open marriage, something almost unthinkable in the 1950s. Shirley told ABC News that she and Parker were very open about all of that, explaining that their marriage worked precisely because they didn't force each other into conventional boxes. They often lived apart, spent years on different continents, and yet somehow stayed married for almost 30 years. She even told People magazine that the arrangement allowed them to remain friends and equals, saying their marriage worked because it gave them both space to live freely. When the marriage finally ended in 1982, there was no dramatic public fallout, no bitterness, no messy tell-all feud, just a quiet mutual understanding that it had run its course. And for Shirley, that was enough. Years later, she shocked the press again when she confessed to CBS News that during her open marriage, she once slept with 3 people in one day and didn't feel ashamed about it. It wasn't said for shock value. It was said as a statement of freedom. For her, that was the point of their arrangement, to be honest, human and free. So why didn't Shirley MacLaine ever walk down the aisle again? The real answer lies in how she views life, love, and spirituality. Shirley is known for her deep metaphysical beliefs, reincarnation, karma, soul connections, and spiritual evolution. Her best-selling book, Out on a Limb, dives deep into those ideas, and she's been open about seeing love as something that exists beyond one lifetime. To her, marriage isn't the ultimate expression of love. It's just one version of it. She once said that she prefers companionship without ownership. It's a simple line, but it captures everything about who she is. Someone who values connection but refuses to be contained by it. For Shirley, love isn't about possession, it's about freedom. There's another side to it, too. Her work has always been the great love of her life. From Broadway to Hollywood, she built a career that most people can only dream of, and she's never really stopped. Acting, writing, producing, and traveling have been her lifelong companions. As she once hinted, she doesn't need a husband to feel whole. Her creative life fulfills her just fine, and that's the heart of it. She's not bitter, she's not lonely, she's content. In her own words, she believes the most profound relationship we'll ever have is the one with ourselves. What Shirley MacLaine movie is your favorite till this very day? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.